Okay, well, welcome everyone to the Portland Clean Energy Community Benefits Fund Grants Committee meeting on November 24th. Today's meeting is a public meeting, but it is really going to be more like acting more like a training for the upcoming grant application review process. So I'm going to start, as we do every meeting, with an opening inspiration. And for this week's opening inspiration, we are thrilled to announce that Sam's has a new baby girl who was born yesterday. Her name is Mina Ray Barrasso, and she is actually just getting discharged and on her way home this evening. So we're all very excited to someday meet her, and mom and baby are healthy and everything is good. So it was just a funny coincidence that she came on the deadline, the extended deadline for the PCEF application. So we also got about 140 applications from the solicitation this time, which was a higher number than any of us had guessed in our staff pool. So we've been plugging away at going through the eligibility review, the eligibility screening. We started that today, and we'll be hopefully finishing that out this week. So that's our opening inspiration. Really, though, the big news there is that the baby has arrived. So. We will just kind of run through the virtual participation check. The chat box is open for introductions. If folks want to put their name, organizational affiliation, if you have one, and pronouns, if you want to share that into the chat box, then we can introduce you after committee and staff introductions. The raise hand function is used by committee members only, and we do ask that for these meetings generally that video is reserved for committee and staff only as well. And that's primarily just because the videos rearrange themselves so much, it's harder for us to kind of keep track of what committee members might want to talk if all of the videos are on. This meeting is being recorded. Everybody should have gotten a notice about that and had to click OK to be able to continue. And there is also closed captioning available. You can find that by going to the menu bar in Zoom, and on the three little dots. If you click on the three little dots, then you can scroll down and if you click View Full Transcript, then you will be able to see the captioning that is happening. So with that, I think that we will move into introductions, and we'll start with committee members. And let's start with Michael.
Michael Eden Hill, he, him, committee member.
Jeffrey?
Jeffrey Moreland, he, him, committee member.
Robin?
Robin Wang, committee member, he, him.
Maria?
Maria Sippin, she, they, committee member.
Faith?
Hi, everyone. Faith Graham, she, her, committee member.
Shanice?
Shanice Clark, she, her, committee member.
Ranfis?
Rainfeast, Genetino Viatoro, he, him, committee member.
And Amanda.
Hi, everyone. Amanda Squimpagnazi, she, her, committee member.
Okay, and now we'll move on to staff. And I think we'll start with Angela, and I'd also just like to welcome Angela Prevedelli. She is actually the newest member of the PCEF team. She's been with DPS and attending these meetings already, but she's our new grants analyst. She started on yesterday. Yesterday was a real big day for PCEF. So.
Hi, everyone. Angela, great to be here as part of the PCEF team. I feel very honored to be part of this team.
James?
She, her.
Oh, sorry.
Hi, everybody, great to see you all, and welcome Angela to the team. And yeah, James Valdez, he, him pronouns, and part of the PCEF startup team.
Janet?
Good evening, everybody. Great to see you. Janet Hammer, she, her, part of the PCEF startup team.
Wendy?
Wendy Kelfkin, she, her, PCEF staff.
And Jill Windsor is joining us. I'll let her introduce herself, but she's going to be helping us with the part of the training today. Jill?
Thanks, Katie. Jill Windsor. I'm staff at BPS, Bureau of Planning and Sustainability, and I use she and they pronouns.
All right. And I am Katie Lister. I'm part of the PCEF startup team. I did want to acknowledge that Megan is going to be joining us late today. She's going to be here around 7:20. And I'll go to the chat and see if any members of the public introduce themselves. Looks like Angela Crowley-Koch with OSEA. She pronouns. Jenny Hall, she, her from Energy Trust. And that is it. And I think I may have forgotten to ask if anyone from the public wanted to provide public comment. Please just indicate your interest in the chat box. Oh, we also have Jay Ward, he, him with Energy Trust. Okay, well, it doesn't look like anybody wants to provide public comment. So I think before we get going, I want to ask all of the committee members if they have any comments or edits or changes to the minutes from the last meeting, which was November 11th. Not seeing any. We will call those good to go. Okay, so this is the basic agenda for tonight. Sam was going to be doing a part of this, so Jill has really very graciously stepped in at the last minute to help with this training. So we're going to be spending the whole meeting really talking about application scoring and bias awareness, since all of you are going to be sitting on scoring panels. There aren't any program updates to give at this time. Well, we give them at the beginning. We have about 140 applications, so that is the big update. So this is a little bit more detail about tonight's training. We're going to do a brief review of the review process and the timeline, talk a little bit about the mechanics and the logistics, like how you log in, how you're going to get the numbers for what applications you're going to review, talk a little bit about how to score grants, and then have some time for a scoring criteria discussion, the discussion on the guidance document. This is will be new to you, Amanda, but the rest of the committee, should be pretty familiar to y'all, have seen these scoring criteria and the guidance that goes along with them a bunch of times before. Then we'll have an overview of bias, and then some findings, places where bias shows up, and exercise. We're going to use the Jamboard again as a way to kind of get a bunch of thoughts down in one place relatively quickly, and then talk some about how to interrupt bias. We'll probably also take a break around 7 o'clock or just around there for 5 or 10 minutes so we can all get up and stretch. So this slide is, and there aren't a ton of slides for tonight. I will say that once we get through the slides, I think that we probably will just kind of close down the slide deck and go back to just being able to see each other's faces, so that hopefully we can have a little bit more conversation during this. I don't know what everybody else's view is or how many screens you have going right now. But as a reminder of the timeline, this just kind of has the important dates up at the top there. December 14th is the date that we intend to assign applications to the different scoring panels. December 23rd is this midpoint check-in. It's not really a deadline, but that's the point at which whoever is the staff lead for your panel we'll check in with you and see kind of how things are progressing, and if you're running into any issues. Obviously, if you run into issues, you're more than welcome to reach out as well. January 7th is when your independent scoring is due back to staff. And then so we take that independent scoring and, we'll average it and provide an opportunity for applicants to respond to the initial score, the initial average of their scores. And then their feedback is due on January 15th. And then we'll schedule a meeting for each scoring panel to meet at some time before January 29th, when we would like all scores to be finalized. Are there any questions on this timeline? So this next slide just shows is a reminder about the grant review process. So here, where we are right now is in this kind of second box. So we got the grant proposals and we're doing an eligibility screening. Then we're going to be, the folks that passed eligibility, if they have physical improvements as part of their project, will go through a technical screening. And then the applications that pass the technical screening as well will be sent on to scoring panels who will do their independent review. Then there's this applicant response step. Then the scoring panels meet and finalize their scores. And then all of that gets sent to you all as a group. So you're a couple different places in this process to make your final recommendations to City Council. So one thing I would like to pause right here for a minute and say is that we intended to have scoring. We've always talked about scoring panels getting about 10 applications per panel. And assuming that doing a review, will vary, the amount of time it will take will vary, but we are estimating around 2 hours per application. So that would be 20 hours per panel. With 9 of you, if there's 1 committee member on each panel, that means that you can see 90 applications. So we got 140 applications. And what we talked about doing in that eventuality before was introducing this threshold review. And so I just like to offer you guys kind of a couple of options. One, I know that Faith and Megan have both already indicated that they have the capacity to be on 2 scoring panels. So if there are other folks on the panel or on the committee who can sit on 2 scoring panels, then we could eliminate the need for a threshold review, which would mean that that there would be committee input into the scoring of every single application. A threshold review would mean that staff would need to do an initial scoring of all of the applications, and then only pass on sort of the top 90, the amount that that the committee had the capacity to sit on a scoring panel with. So no pressure, but that's the kind of choice we're at right now. Sorry, Michael.
Have you done the initial eligibility screening and technical screenings yet?
No, we have started the eligibility screening, and we anticipate that pretty much everybody, because of the way that the application portal was structured, we're really just doing a double check and also verifying some of the information, but we anticipate that pretty much everyone will be eligible if they made it through the portal and were able to hit submit. And I don't know about, so we haven't finished that yet. We think we're going to finish it tomorrow. And then the technical screening is going to be the following 2 weeks. And it's hard to say if that will eliminate very many. I suspect it will not.
And how many additional, so it's 10 per person. So how many additional, if someone was to take on another one, would that be 20 total for that person?
That would be the idea, yeah.
So we're thinking, how many additional people do you need right now? There's
3.
3, so there's basically 2 additional panels.
Well, so yeah, so that there would be, so Megan and Faith already indicated that they could be on 2 panels. And so we just need 3 additional people to be able to kind of have enough panels to do all of the application, to send all of the applications to a scoring panel.
And
Robin?
And if we just stay regular, how many additional would it be per panel?
What do you mean? What do you mean? If
Like
you stay regular?
if we just had our existing panels, I don't know how we divide up the panels. I don't know how many people are sitting on a panel or how it's divided up, but if we all take on all 100, the 140, we go from 10 each to how many each?
Well, so I think it depends. When we talked about this before, I think we wanted the committee, you all sort of indicated that you wanted to be able to accommodate the fact that some people might have more time during this time and some people might have less time. So we didn't kind of want to divide them just evenly. We wanted to get a little bit more feedback from you all, but each panel will get 10 applications, and the panels, because of the large number of applications we got, will have 3 people on them, 1 committee member, 1 staff member, and then 1 sort of other person. And the other person, we do have some folks we have a few sort of folks from outside PCEF staff and from outside the committee who have agreed to sit on panels who are subject matter experts or volunteers and willing to take that on. So it would be 3 people, but with 1 committee member and 1 staff person for sure on every single panel. So if each of you was just on 1 panel, we could do 90 applications in that manner. But with, and then, so Faith and Megan indicated they could do 2, so that gets us up to 110 that we could kind of accommodate through that method by adding 2 more panels. So we could do all of them if we added 3 more panels. And if not, we can go the threshold review route.
Okay, so I guess my question was, with our 9 panels, 10 each, so if we have 9 panels divided by 140, that's, I can't do the math there, but that's like 13 each.
So are you suggesting that sort of everyone, and I guess that would be a question for you all, if you think that would be you all saying you could take a little bit more. And I do see Robin and then Shanice's hand up. Robin?
Yeah, I just wanted to know, when do you need to know? I was on the fence about, another panel. And I should know towards the end of next week if I have the availability.
Well, I mean, I think that if we could know by the end of next week, that would be great. If we need to do the threshold review, we definitely do need to notify, we need to change the timeline, and we need to notify the folks that are outside of the PCEF team and outside of the committee of that change. So we would want to do it as soon as we could. But if it would be helpful to wait, we certainly can. Shanice?
I'll just quickly say, I know some other committee members want to weigh in as well. I'd be willing to do a second, and the timing would of when they would occur would just be helpful, so I could coordinate and make those plans now to have time available. But I'm also open to the option that was posed towards the end of that transition, folks maybe taking a little bit more. I'm open to doing a little bit more, and I can do a second one.
Okay. So, and Michael, just because I never like to do math in public, didn't jump in there, but I did do it on a calculator. So it would be, if you divided them evenly, it would be everyone taking 15 and a half. So each panel would be increased by that, to that amount. Ranfis and then Faith.
Sorry. Yeah, I guess, I mean, yeah, I'd love to talk with folks on this one. I'm supportive if it's, we split them to 15, or I'm also happy to jump onto another panel. Also just wanted to know, like, you know, I think in the future, I'd love to find ways to do panels together. You know, I think it's great that we're all doing one in our individual panel. I know it's a challenge to do all of the applications together, but just wanted to note that. I do have a question around if we'll get the list of the other volunteers or subject matter experts who will be participating on these review panels, and just a clarification on the selection process for those candidates. And yeah, just kind of curious on that. And if there's any folks from the community that will be part of the review process.
Okay. Faith? You're muted, Faith.
Now, but not my mute. Now, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Sorry about that. In my opinion, it would be ideal for us all to have roughly about the same. And I know we needed some flexibility to get to that. I was hoping that maybe we could go around the room right now to see. I heard Ranfis and Shanice both say they could take on an extra few. I wonder, can we go all around the room before I then put a motion in place that we just divide them equally among the 9 panels, to see if that's a problem for anyone? Because if it is, obviously, let's just skip that and go on to a different solution. So I'm willing to take on 15, and if you could just call on the others and see if everyone is willing to do that.
Yeah, that sounds good. Michael did have his hand up. So Michael, do you want to go ahead and make your comment before we do that?
My only question was, the other people that are going to be on review panel from outside, are they going to go through the implicit, explicit bias training and all that also, and sort of?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And I did, so Megan just joined us. And so Megan, just to catch you up, Sam had a baby, Nina Ray, who was born yesterday. We got 140 applications. And so what we're doing right now is trying to figure out how to manage those without having so that committee members can have input into all of the applications rather than going through a threshold review where staff does an initial screening. So the question is, if we divided them evenly amongst everyone so that there's one committee member per panel and there's 9 panels, then there would be 15 applications. I mean, there would be a couple panels with 16, but 15 or 16 applications per panel rather than the original 10. And so the question is, does everybody have the capacity to do that? And so that was the question that Faith posed. And so Robin, did you want to say something before we went around the room?
Yeah, before you go around the room, can you bring up the slide of the calendar?
Yeah. Let me just share my screen. Oh, my screen is.
There we go. Thank
you.
you.
Do you see it?
Thanks.
Okay.
Last.
Huh?
Call me last.
Okay. I'll call on you last. So maybe we'll start with Jeffrey.
I'm open to sharing it equally. I can do 15.
Okay. And just for clarification, since we brought up the timeline, it's this December 14th. That's when the applications get assigned. So it's really this time period on the independent scoring column, that December 14th to January 7th. That's when like the lion's share of the kind of time would be. It's when you would have to be reading the applications. Shanice?
I can be on either side of the fence here. I'm open to doing 2 panels and then splitting it would be great. I think getting committee's eyes on applications, especially not having the full group opportunity to look through them, makes a lot of sense if we can all do it. So if we can all do the 15, maybe that we go with that.
Thanks, Shanice. Ranfis?
Yeah, supportive on 15. Can do either, but supportive of 15.
Okay. Michael?
I think that it's really important that for this first round that we make sure that committee members do actually review every single one. I think that as our first round, we really do owe it to the community to make sure that the committee is looking at all of them. So I am in favor of 15. I would be willing to take on 15.
Hey. Maria?
I can take on 15. Also, I'm flexible.
Okay. Amanda?
Yeah, I can take on 15 as well.
Great. All right, and I think we have heard from Faith, and Megan has already. Megan?
Yeah, do you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Okay, sorry, audio check. Thanks for bringing me up to speed, and my apologies for being late. Also, congratulations to Sam and the new baby, and congratulations to us on 140 applications. That seems really exciting, I think. So that's exciting. Yeah. And yeah, I'm all in on 15. It seems like a really good rationale. And what else am I doing right now? So yeah, I'm in.
All right. All right, Robin, we're circling back to you.
No, thank you. I just needed to look at some calendars. Just a clarifying question. That period between the 13th or 14th and January 9th, we don't have any deadlines in that time frame. Meaning that, if we wanted to review everything that first week, we could do that, or if we want to do everything the last week, we could do that. We set the pace.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Yeah, then count me in for 15, 16.
Okay. All right, Faith.
Yeah, I propose that we share equally between the 9 panels and the 9 committee members, all of the 140 applications, so that each panel will have 15 or 16 applications to review. So I need a second on that.
Mm-hmm.
I'll second that motion.
I missed who that was.
That was Jeffrey.
Okay. Jeffrey, second. Okay, so now we'll just go around and you can indicate if you agree with the decision, want to stand by, or oppose. And we'll start with Jeffrey. Oh, you seconded it, so we're actually going to skip you. Shanice?
I support.
Ranfis?
Support.
Robin?
I support.
Michael?
I support.
Maria?
Support.
Amanda?
I support.
And Megan?
I support.
Okay, and Faith proposed, so we know she supports. So that's the decision. Thank you all. Okay, so now we will, and Faith and Robin, you both have your hands up still. So I just want to make sure there's not anything else you want to, okay.
Sorry,
go ahead and look. Okay, so moving on back to the sort of the process. Once we get through the eligibility screening and the technical screening, we will assign now 15 or 16 applications per scoring panel, and each scoring panel will receive a packet, and that packet will have a cover sheet that lists all of the applications. The applications will, to the extent possible, be sort of clustered as the same project type. So we want folks to be looking at all clean energy projects or all regenerative agriculture projects. Although within that, there will be ones that there will be small grants and large grants, but they will be the sort of the same general project type. There will probably be some things that are not super clear cut, and there will certainly be projects that have multiple components. And so it won't be like absolutely clean, but we'll try and have like the primary component be of the project type be kind of what determines what scoring panel it goes to. Also in the packet will be an overview of the program purpose, the guiding principles. That's more for folks not on the committee, since you all are kind of intimately familiar with those, but for folks from off of the committee, a bias awareness handout, a conflict of interest statement that everyone will be required to sign who serves on a scoring panel, scoring instructions, and then the scoring criteria guidance tables, which you guys are familiar with and which were published with the RFP, a copy of the application questions, attachment A for the small and large grants, and then links to additional useful information. So that's the kind of packet of material that goes to each scoring panel to assist with their, assist them in their review process. The review will actually happen like the physical, it's not really physical, but the review itself will happen in an online portal. And this is just a screenshot of the eligibility screening portion of that we're doing right now. So basically you will get a unique identifier for every application that has been assigned to your scoring panel. Enter that log into the portal, enter the unique identifier, and then it'll pull up that application for you. And you'll be able to go through each of the sections and read the material that the applicants put in there, and see also the accompanying documents. Those are the attachments that they submitted with their grant application, and then enter your scores from 0 to 4, which is a 5-point scale, but it's 0 to 4 for each of the criteria. The review portal will only allow you to score the criteria that are relevant to the application that you're scoring, which is nice because it's pretty easy. You may recall that the large grant applications, there are actually kind of 4 distinctions within large grant applications. There's projects that have a single site construction budget over $500,000. Those have a certain set of criteria that apply to them that don't apply to any of the other types of projects. And then there are, 1 or 2 criteria for projects that have a construction workforce. They do have physical improvement, but they don't have a single site property or construction project budget that is over $500,000. So those sorts of things are all kind of sorted out automatically in the review portal, and which is nice. And there is a place to save notes in the review portal. One thing that is important for folks who are scoring applications, I think, to remember is that any notes you make, like on paper, really we should collect those. And so how we'll do that, over Zoom, is that you take a picture of it and email it to us or text it to us or something like that. But ideally, we would really like you to just enter your notes into the review portal because then everything is in one place and it's all kind of can be archived better. It is all a matter of, it all becomes part of the public record and kind of gets retained appropriately. So that is what that is. And everyone should be able to, everyone will be, not should, but will be able to use their city logon for their city email to be able to log into the portal. And then that will, on the back end, will determine what access you have and what you're able to see and do. Any questions about that? It's pretty straightforward. Robin?
Yeah, can you just quickly go over what's going to be, public information? What's going to be captured? Is it every single point that we award? Is it all the notes, or is it just the summary of everything? I'm just kind of curious how much granularity will be available to the public.
Yeah, so I think we won't associate your name, we won't associate your identity with your individual scores. We will have, like for example, during the applicant feedback stage, that's where everyone submits their independent scores. You do your independent scoring. Staff will average those, but we'll average them for every single scoring criteria. So that the applicant will see sort of how they scored on criteria A on average, how they scored on criteria B on average, and then we'll take notes from that, because that's also an opportunity to ask clarifying questions, and just one, staff will kind of verify that it is in fact a clarifying question and isn't soliciting additional content or something like that, and package that up and send it to the applicant. When things get published, same sort of thing. It will be, everything will be averaged, and there won't be kind of individual people associated with individual scores. Does that answer the question?
Yep, thank you.
I think the other side, of confidentiality is that while all of these applications are, are public and will become part of the public record, there's a requirement in the code to post them on the website, which we intend to do after recommendations are made. We do ask that during the scoring, during this review period, that that everyone, just don't talk, that folks refrain from talking about the application to people outside of their scoring panel or outside of PCEF staff, just until the scoring panels have had a chance to do their work, and then the full committee, you all get back together and have a chance to do your work. And then after that, we will be posting putting the applications online so that everybody can have access to them and be able to see them. But we're not going to do that until after we get through this review period. Anything else on that? Okay, so that's actually the last slide in this portion. And what I'm going to do is just stop sharing, having trouble finding the button there. And just wanted to ask if there was anything, if there were any questions that folks had about the material that we sent out prior to the meeting that doesn't have to do necessarily with the bias awareness, since that's kind of the next section of the meeting, but anything else related to the process. The document that we sent out had kind of step-by-step and some reminders about just kind of taking your time and making a plan about scoring grants and things like that. Grand Feast?
Sorry, I had a question for about some of the last items. I don't know if that's too late to ask a question,
no.
But I'm curious, back to some of my initial questions, like, are we gonna get the full list of subject matter experts and volunteers who will be scoring? Would that be transparent to the public in terms of who will be scoring? And then from the staff and volunteer side, will they be scoring the same number of grants that we will be? Like we've distributed between us 15 at most, but will that be the same case for staff and volunteers? How will that portion work out on the scoring side for staff and volunteers?
So for volunteers, it will probably work out to be the same as committee members. I mean, we need to check in with them and see what they're available, because we didn't know how many applications we were going to get to kind of gauge what their availability is as well. Staff will be, there are fewer of us than there are of you, so we will be reading we will be reading a larger number of and covering more panels, and than committee members. And I don't know, I mean, I hadn't, I guess, thought about kind of putting the names of folks who are sitting on scoring panels in some way, kind of like on the website or something. I don't see why not, but I just kind of hadn't thought about that. And we certainly can send a list of folks to the committee. I don't have that right in front of me right now, but I can tell you that what it was driven by, I can tell you kind of what it was driven by. And it was driven by a desire to have scoring panels that were comprised of, that were majority people of color, that had gender balance, and that had at least one person on each panel who was sort of a subject matter expert in their area. And so when we looked at staff, and we looked at the committee, and then we kind of looked at where we had some holes in one of those areas, and we pulled from a lot the sort of different parts of the city where we have colleagues who could bring some of those components into the scoring panels.
Yeah, that's helpful. I would encourage, where possible, to be just transparent on who's scoring and what panels. I think it's good for the public. You know, I think in any kind of grant making process, the most important aspect is integrity. People want to be able to trust the process. And when we go from year to year where the panels look different, you know, scoring outcomes could change differently, or I think it's just good to know how the panels are developed and comprised. And, you know, I think, to me, I think it's just really more important part of the process to make sure people can trust the process to begin with. You know, I know we're kind of in the challenge around, you know, we're just learning as we go. I would also try to encourage, where possible, to make sure that in any panel, you know, as we review applications, that, you know, that we're all kind of working the same number. Like, it'd be preferable, like, no one person is scoring more than, you know, 15. I know that might be a challenge now, but that's another thing. The only other question I have is around this process is there a distinction? Like, are there, within each panel, is there like a neutral, independent staff member who's kind of like a facilitator on some of these conversations, or is there like a dual role, like where a staff will be a scorer and a facilitator in these conversations? Just wanted to clarify on that last process piece question.
Yeah, I think, well, and if I could maybe just like thinking back to some of the conversations that we had in the past about the scoring panels, not knowing how many applications we were going to get, we kind of thought, like, in an ideal world, it would be really great if there was, like, scoring panels had 5 people, and then we could make sure that there were 2 committee members on each panel. But that would have required a much, much smaller number of grant applications. It would have been nice because you guys would have had sort of, you know, a committee member colleague to be able to talk to about things. And then we were like, but we're probably going to get more, so we probably need to move it to 3. I think the idea is that the PCEF staff person who is assigned to each scoring panel will be in charge of making sure that fields get entered into the portal, that any kind of documentation that needs to be collected gets collected, that the doodle poll to schedule the scoring panel meeting gets sent out, and that kind of to facilitate that process. And then probably in some ways to facilitate the discussion once the scoring panel meets about to finalize the scores. That's the idea. Do you have thoughts on that?
No, that's helpful. I guess, so just to clarify then, it sounds like the PCEF staff person will be facilitating that part, but they won't be also scorers, or they will be scorers. Sorry.
Yeah, no, they would also be scorers on the panel that they're the lead on, yeah. Michael?
I just want to make sure, because I don't know, I feel like our PCEF staff hires have been very white presenting since our initial 4 hires of PCEF staff, and I'm hoping that we get a more diverse group as our additional reviewers of these grant applications. I hope that we really, once again, intentionally get people that are from the community, that are very diverse, that are people from the groups that are being affected by these grants, and not necessarily quite so white presenting. So I hope that is taken into account as you put together this additional 9 people.
Yeah, and that has, I will say that when Sam and I put together the list of folks who would be serving on the scoring panels, and definitely had, that was definitely one of the considerations, for sure. Ramses, did you have something else?
Yeah, I guess, I don't want to hold up too much on this. Happy to follow up, after this conversation. But kind of maybe just for folks to think about, I would kind of encourage to decouple the role of facilitator and scorer. In most grant making panels, they're kind of 2 distinct roles. And as we get in the next panel around like potential, biases that could arise, I think it's difficult. Sometimes it'll be a challenge for a facilitator to help facilitate some of these dialogues, and also have a sort of their own perspective on how they've scored. So just kind of something to think about. Those roles are distinct, whether it's in the procurement standpoint, but even distinct in the role on like social justice or community grant making. So something to just think about, and just a recommendation. I normally see those 2 roles being decoupled.
Yeah, and actually that would not be a difficult change to make even at this point. Yeah, Megan?
Yeah, I'm just appreciating the points my fellow committee members have brought up, Michael and Renfis. To the Renfis's last point that he made a couple times about the decoupling, yeah, I think that's a really strong idea. I've definitely been on some grant making processes, and I could see that there should be a neutral staff who's not involved in scoring, because it's difficult for them not to sort of have their own kind of stake in it after they read applications and are sort of scoring them. So I appreciate that point. And to Michael's on staff as well.
Yeah, I think that, and so I can, if everyone else agrees, I think that is an easy enough change for us to make, who's facilitating the scoring panel meetings. Any other questions or comments or suggestions? Well, if if we get to the, if you have a little bit more time to sit with the document that was sent out, and other questions come up, please feel free to reach out, and or if there are other suggestions that come up, please reach out if you think of something that you haven't already thought of yet. I did want to touch on a question that Robin raised a couple of meetings ago about, just because it's part of this whole review process, but it's really kind of toward the end. We do have a conflict of interest statement that we're asking everyone who sits on a review panel to kind of sign and say that they don't have a conflict of interest. And I think that the question then became, if once everything goes back to the full committee, and the full committee is recommending a packet of grants to be funded to City Council, if there's a conflict anywhere, within that packet, does that mean that the person has to sort of opt out of that vote? And the answer to that, I think, is no. And the guidance that we've gotten is just that committee members who have a conflict in the full committee discussion, which are the meetings where you're going to be sort of making decisions about recommendations or beginning to have the discussions that lead to that you would just want to opt out of just recuse yourself from that part of the conversation, that there's not a need to recuse yourself from voting on advancing the entire packet. Megan?
Sorry, you just brought up a question that I'd like a little more clarification on. So does that mean like getting put into a breakout room during any discussion of that, or not? I don't know that we would have such lower scale discussions of those individual projects, but yeah, which I don't think I think that could be a good way to do it, possibly.
Yeah, I mean, it really is kind of up to you all. I think that what the thing that we would like folks to do is just not participate in the conversation. If you want to leave the room for the conversation, or have us move you into a breakout room where you're kind of just alone in a Zoom room until the conversation is over, and then bring you back, that could be, and then you wouldn't even hear any of the conversation, then we could do that as well, but that is not required. Do folks feel pretty comfortable with the scoring criteria guidance, and with comfortable that they're going to be able to get these grants and plug along? And all right, well then I'm going to suggest that we take a 5-minute break, or a 6-minute break. It's 6:54, and then we can break until 7 o'clock, and then I'm going to kind of turn it over to Jill to talk a little bit about the bias awareness and kind of where bias might show up in the grant review process. Okay, we'll see you back here at 7 p.m. 7 o'clock. And I'm gonna ask Jill to make herself visible. Oh, there you are. And Jill, I'm gonna do the screen advancing thing, so just kind of let me know when you want me to advance to the next screen.
Awesome, thanks, Katie. All right, everyone. So thanks for having me at this meeting tonight. I work at the Bureau of Planning and Sustainability, and part of my role there, I sit on the equity team and I support our recruitment. So I provide a lot of support to our hiring managers related to how we bring new staff into the Bureau. And part of that is providing a bias awareness conversation for all of our interview panels. So with Sam out tonight, I'm going to be recreating that conversation with you all and focusing in on how bias shows up in grant review and just having a conversation with you all. I know there's a lot of expertise in the room, so this slide deck is really brief. I just want to do some gentle grounding, remind some folks of terms, and then open it up for a conversation to bring your expertise into the room. To provide some sources for the deck, the information captured on these slides comes from information from the Bureau of Human Resources. They provide a guide for interview panels to think about bias in that process. We also pulled information from the Portland Children's Levy bias awareness training. And then I've participated in some trainings with Sorelda Summers McGee, who's an organizational change expert and is actually the former director of the Bureau of Human Resources for the city of Portland. So that's where this information is coming from. And we'll just dive in. So Katie, next slide. So we start with the Portland Plan's definition of equity, which is when everyone has access to opportunities necessary to satisfy essential needs, advance their well-being, and achieve their full potential. We're wanting to center this definition in this conversation as we're reviewing grants, really making sure we're sort of honing in on what the goal is here. And this is, we know, a central goal of the PCEF program. So really making sure we're sort of centered in that place as we're starting to review grant applications. And that's a place we would like to start as a city when we look at hiring, workforce, contracting, all of these big pieces, making sure that we're honing in on that as we're moving towards this vision captured in the Portland Plan. Next slide. I like to think of bias awareness as an equity tool. We know that grant review is not scientific, that bias is definitely showing up in a selection process. We all hold biases. So any space we're entering into, we're bringing our biases with us. The best way to interrupt bias and address bias is to name and examine them, to pay attention to them, to not just pretend like it's not happening. We need to be engaging in our biases and having conversations so that we can learn to dismantle and really move forward and engage in a more equitable process. So that's why we're having this conversation together today, to really get comfortable naming bias, facing bias, and digging deeper and really looking at what information is available to us in these applications. Next slide. What is bias? Biases are the positions we hold about others. Those are individuals, groups of people, and organizations that are influenced by our past experiences. So positions we hold that are influenced by past experiences. During grant review, we're focused on how bias impacts our partiality, our preconceived notions, and our predispositions. Next slide. Our brains are processing a ton of information every single day. There's some research indicating that it's the same amount of information equivalent to reading 174 newspapers. So to take in those massive amounts of new information each and every day, our brains have set up schemas or templates of knowledge structures that are used to sort of categorize incoming information, to process that quickly, and to put things into these schemas and these mental models. Next slide. Bias can show up in a handful of ways. We're going to cover many of the different types of bias, but I want to just touch on stereotypes and attitudes and then review a little bit the difference between explicit and implicit bias. So stereotypes are those categorizations we make, those associations we make that sort of tie something to a category. And these come from personal experience sometimes. They more often come from those stories we've heard, stories in the media, stories in our family, in our cultures of origin, our church communities, the communities we participate in. Stereotypes are especially dangerous because they're often rooted in systemic oppression. So really paying attention to those places where stereotypes are showing up and the narratives that we hear about people and about communities. Attitudes are the overall evaluative feelings we might have, positive or negative. Looking at explicit and implicit bias, explicit biases are the biases we know we hold. We're aware of them, we can name them. We can often even sort of point to where they came from. We can sort of dig into the origin of those ideas. An example of explicit bias is the belief that maintaining eye contact is a sign of respect or a sign of competence. So we might be biased towards people that maintain direct eye contact because we hold that belief. We believe that to be true. Implicit biases are those biases that are harder to uncover. They're sort of underneath the surface. We may not know their origin. It's harder to really name and pay attention to. Implicit biases, an example that we can use for this conversation is thinking about when we're talking about the director of an organization and we haven't really learned much information about that director, our brain might tell us to anticipate that that person is a man. We believe that women are capable of holding positions of power. In fact, we know women in those positions. We may ourselves hold those positions. But the implicit bias that we hold, the trick that our brain plays is telling us that that person is likely a man. It's an assumption that we're making. Implicit biases are really problematic in grant review process and in all processes because they're really hard to name and unpack. And we have to do a much better job of paying attention to when they show up. Next slide. So I'm going to cover some familiar types of bias, and then we're going to talk about some that may be a little bit more specific to grant review. All of these can play into grant review, but we've got some special considerations on the next slide. So thinking about types of bias, I'm going to touch on a few and then invite you all to ask questions about others on this list if I haven't brought them into this space. So first, a note about scoring. There is something called average or central bias, which is when we score folks right down the middle. We're just giving those even scores, not really giving high scores or low scores. We can also have a problem with leniency when we're giving really easy scores or more critical scores where we're grading really harshly. So paying attention to who you are as a scorer. Are you a lenient scorer? Are you a more critical scorer? Really paying attention to using the criteria to actually score these applications versus your sort of tendency in one direction or another. Then looking at horn and halo effect, when this is really sort of overvaluing specific characteristics more than others. So if you see an application and you see some characteristics in that application that you find to be really positive, and then you sort of hone in on those and stop paying as much attention to everything else that's in the application. That can be the halo effect, where we really, those first couple of things that we're excited about, make it hard for us to see everything else that's in the application. And the converse of that is the horn effect, where something might stand out in the application that we feel kind of negatively about, and we're then unable to see all of the positive aspects in that application, all the other information that could be really exciting. Comparing and contrasting, we are asking you to score applications based on the criteria. You will, of course, as you read 15 applications, start to compare them one to the other, but doing your best to really score each application individually and on its own merits. Similar to me in familiarity, if we are reviewing an application and really sort of recognize some similar aspects in our identity with the person who's completed the grant application, we can make some assumptions about their ability or capabilities. Familiarity, if we have a relationship with an organization, we're familiar with an organization, we might assume more information about that organization that is really present in the application. And then recency, of course, is having more positive feelings towards applications that we've seen most recently. It's really sort of fresh in the mind. We're able to call it to mind more easily. Are there others on this slide that we want to go into right now? Any questions about these other types of bias? All right, we'll move to the next slide. So special considerations for this grant application review process. We know that often writing skills can be sort of misused as a way to assume level of intelligence or capacity of the person whose writing we're evaluating. And we especially know that for folks for whom English is a second language, who may have less proficient use of the language, they are fully capable of doing the work proposed in the application. So being careful to really evaluate the quality of the information provided and pay less attention to whether or not you think the words used or the grammar is perfect. We also know that it is possible that some of the applications may have been written by paid grant writers, so keeping that in mind as well. We also really want to sort of pay attention to the right language. We may have folks who use language that's sort of emerging, for example, terms Latinx compared to Hispanic. So really paying attention to, does use of a particular set of language bias us positively toward a grant? And how can we sort of question and challenge that and really dig deeper into thinking about who's completing the application, if someone's in community, what sort of cultural relationships they have with that language. Belief in the right way to do something. So we all, folks who are reviewing these grants, have a wealth of experience and may really have some strong opinions about how work should be done, and making sure to create some space for the grant applications, the applicants, to provide other ideas about how to complete work specifically in different cultural settings. Assumptions about capacity. We may have some assumptions based on the demographics of an organization or the size of an organization. We may assume that some folks are really skilled at engineering or construction. We may assume that a smaller organization doesn't have the capacity to take on a big project. So really paying attention to those assumptions. Assumptions about nonprofits. We often talk about nonprofits as being really scrappy and low budget, maybe not having as much sort of professional skill as a for-profit organization. We might anticipate that their budgets are smaller, that they pay their staff less, that they don't have the capacity to take on a big project. Letters of support. Please remember that letters of support were not required for this grant application process. There may still be some that were submitted, so keeping in mind not overvaluing those letters of support, not giving them undue weight in the process. And then confusion about equity. So really keeping in mind that with equity, we're talking about fairness. With equality, we're talking about sameness, and holding that truth as you're reviewing applications. What does fairness look like in this grant review process? How is that demonstrated in these applications? Katie, next slide. The most important thing we can do with bias awareness, all the research indicates we really need to just slow down. Slowing it down allows us to pay attention to our body if we're having sort of that cringe response, if we're holding tension, really paying attention to the reactions that we might not even know we're having. This is especially important when we're talking about implicit bias. How are we sort of feeling that bias as it shows up in our bodies? Slowing down also allows us to notice when we're having strong negative or positive reactions, pay attention to that, or when we're having kind of a blah reaction that's sort of underwhelmed, and really questioning what's going on there. Slowing down makes it possible to focus on content and actually ask ourselves the questions of how bias might be influencing my reaction. When you're in that panel with your fellow panelists, make sure you're sort of engaging each other in that conversation as well. The reason we're having this conversation tonight as a committee, and we'll have this conversation again with other panel participants, is to really invite folks to question yourselves, how bias is showing up for you, and also question that with each other, really challenge each other to engage in this conversation and think more deeply. And then you've been given a lot of instructions about how to score applications. The portal will guide you through it. We are really recommending that you score applications based on the criteria that have been established. So that's this note about scoring applications immediately after reviewing them. I think what you're actually being asked to do is to read them, sit with them, and then score. But really the point here is that you're using those scoring criteria to review applications rather than scoring applications compared to one another. So that's my slide deck. I know we have an activity to kind of invite folks in the room to share your expertise and consideration.
Yeah. Are there any other, was there any questions, comments, thoughts before we move on? Robin?
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. That's very informative. I guess the question I have is, can you maybe dive deeper in terms of the difference between a bias and maybe if a committee member has a special expertise in a particular area, and he, she, they might be more critical at reviewing an application in their area of expertise, and how do we balance that versus some of the biases that you just talked about?
Yeah, that's a great question. Thank you, Robin. I think it's important to think about undue weight. If you have expertise in that realm, you're of course going to be really using a critical lens to that application. How can you balance in conversation the knowledge you have of the field really being able to compare what is presented in the application with the expertise that you hold? Are you being overly critical, really paying attention to the actual matchup of your information and the information provided in the application versus being sort of unduly critical, overly critical? I'm curious to hear if other folks have thoughts on that with the expertise that you all bring in your specific fields. Any other thoughts on how we might pay attention to that? I think part of what is beneficial is the fact that PCEF is, oh, go ahead, I'm sorry.
Oh, we had a couple of hands. I thought, Jeffrey, if you want to go, and then Megan. Oh, we can't hear you, Jeffrey.
Sorry, I had my phone on mute as well. Yeah, one of the example of that I'm a contractor. So one of the things that one of my expertise is I know that especially minority contractors that the whole competency or the capacity thing has been used traditionally to lock a lot of us out. So that's one of the things that, I personally do know, but at the same time have to balance, whether or not, that firm is competent enough to get the job done or does have the capacity to get the job done. But at the same time, you having the background of seeing, firms be locked out because of, that being an easy way for them to say, to discriminate in that way. So having that that's, I guess, an example of that for me.
Was there another hand raised?
I think Megan put her question in the chat, and it was just is there a handout about all the possible biases? I don't know all of those terms. And yes, there is in the application packet or in the sort of reviewer packet that you'll get, there will be a section on the biases. Renfis?
Yeah, I had a different comment. I appreciate Jeffrey's comment, and I think I'm sure there's stuff like I don't feel like I'm like particular expert on one thing, but I'll definitely say like what I know anecdotally could be a factor, and how do I balance that? It's always great to like differentiate between what I know anecdotally to like performance measures, which will I think be challenged here, but like finding ways, I think one for me it'll be like good to like balance that out with what I know now, and then how we do this in an application process. But then how do we address that even moving forward? So I think that's been really helpful. One particular bias that I kind of a little bit disagree on, which I'll just be transparent on, is letters of support. Mainly because I come from like from a development standpoint, but even from like a reviewer standpoint, like name dropping happens a lot in applications, both in like procurement, but even in grant making. It's really like easy to name drop and say, oh, we work with this group and that group, and we contract with this group or subcontract. And I think there's a bias for any review when we're seeing those like partnerships being name dropped. Like that's another potential bias. But how do you balance that? Like the only way for me mentally to balance just the name dropping is how do you verify that those partnerships exist? So I've been in panels where I've seen like different groups being name dropped on a similar competitive application, and then you're like, wait, which is that group supporting both projects, all three projects? Like, how could they be on the same application? So I don't know if this is making any sense to me, but to me, it's always like, I see that there is a potential bias in coming from letters of support. I understand that we're not putting too much weight on letters of support, but for me, it's like trying to balance another potential bias that we don't have currently a way of verifying if some of these name drops are true partnerships or not. So just kind of an area that I'm kind of wrestling with. I'll just air out my personal bias and just weigh that, I think there's this wrestling with this question around how do we verify what's being reported to us or what we're reading in these narratives is true. And I sort of agree and disagree a little bit on the letters of support, if that makes sense.
Ranfis, I'd like to touch on that. I wanted to get back to Robin and Jeffrey's comments first. I do think one of the benefits of how this is set up is that you aren't alone. You are in a panel of other folks. So if you are noticing that because of your expertise, you might be slightly more critical, naming that in that space, or if you're on a panel and you notice that someone in the room is bringing their expertise to bear and really sort of having that critical lens, having a conversation about it, naming it, naming, Jeffrey, that expertise, you have that experience that you're bringing into the space, naming and discussing that as a panel so that you all are able to balance and connect with each other around that. I think that's the power of having a group of folks weighing in on these applications so that you're able to sort of bounce ideas off of each other and push each other and question those biases and dig a little bit deeper. Ranfis, to your point, yeah, I agree. I think one thing to consider, if this, I don't know as much about grant review as clearly you all do, but if that is pretty common practice to name drop, if you find an application that is not name dropping as much, are you sort of marking them down because they don't have those relationships? So asking yourself the question, is this a newer organization? Are they not as well established? So sort of using that to balance comparison. Am I valuing this name dropping so much so that I am devaluing for another application the fact that they don't have that? So having that sort of question in place. But I'm curious if other folks have responses to what Ranfis has shared or other comments.
I'll weigh in really briefly, and what I heard too is this notion of maybe the name dropping itself might paint a picture for us that we might want to be, I guess, thoughtful about, especially given some of the dynamics or elements of our process. And so I hear that around feasts, and know that it is a practice, to kind of reflect on relationships, whether or not they are comprehensive, whether or not folks are aware they're being named, and et cetera. And so I think those are things to kind of communicate that I think are good, and maybe we look more holistically at a full picture rather than the simple presence of someone being referenced. But
I just want to add, I think I'm looking at the criteria here and the grant scoring criteria, and it's been a while since I've seen it. But I think for me, it just relates back to the criteria itself. And I think at a high level, if I recall correctly, we kind of insulated the grant scoring criteria from the name dropping. And so it's for me, it's really going back to the criteria, looking at the criteria as you're evaluating, and determining if name dropping or some other bias might affect a particular criteria. Not sure if that kind of answers your question, but I think it's just, again, for me, it's just holding these criteria close at hand when I'm reviewing the applications. That's my 2 cents.
Yeah, this is just to respond to that. I think I kind of see. I mean, hopefully, I'm not wrong in saying this, but I think when as experts in some of our fields, like I think it's good to blurt out what the bias is. But I think there's even a opportunity to learn about what Jeffrey's seeing or what Robin's seeing or what even I'm seeing, right? So, and what maybe, how do you balance that in the design of an application? So Jeffrey talked about like what the competency of a contractor. To me, it's like, okay, how do you sort of measure that? How can you measure that so it's you're no longer talking about how is he using that to assess that, right? How do you break that down to assess it? And so that anyone could use sort of that assessment to have a more a way of being able to assess that through many different applications, that even a non-expert could apply that and maybe see what Jeffrey's seeing. Or even for my example, like name dropping isn't the bias there is like, for me as a former community organizer, coalitions matter. And there's a value of coalitions. So naming that there's name dropping is a bias, that's important for me to acknowledge, but it's also, as an expert, I'm saying, hey, there's something going on. When you're building these relationships, there's a value there that, maybe we need to call out down the road as an expert to say, hey, like there's a value here. How do I address my bias? But how do we even capture in the design where we are able to value this and verify this information? I might be digressing a little bit, but I kind of see sort of a connection here a little bit with being a subject matter expert, and just I think even an opportunity to elevate that expertise in some of the ways that we were trying to elevate that earlier when we were designing this application, if that makes sense. So I'll stop because I think I'm digressing on this point, but I very value this conversation on biases.
Really quickly, I'll offer this. What's coming up for me right now is like an equity lens. Like, I don't know if folks have done this equity lens exercise, and probably the city of Portland has some sort of template already. And maybe it's a process where we air out some of, I think in a healthy way of making decisions would be good to think about this practice with our criteria as well. Yeah, surfacing some assumptions in a way that complements our process, I think makes sense. And potentially there's a set of questions or some sort of equity lens that might exist even with BPS or some area of the city of Portland that could be a place to look as we go into the reviewing. But yeah, just a thought.
Thanks, Shanice. We can look into that. I think, Jill, I don't know if you have any resources that you might be able to tap into.
Yeah, I think there's a couple tools at BPS and then broader in the city that might get at what Shanice is addressing. Those are questions to sort of air assumptions and dig into that as a group. I also, I want you all to value the expertise you're bringing in the room, and not that expertise may lead to some biases, but that's why this is a group conversation, and that's why we're sort of paying attention to how biases are showing up and talking about it, because it is totally appropriate that if you have experience as a community organizer and you know the value of community organizing, that you're bringing that into the space. That's why you're on this committee. This experience that you all have, the lived experience, the work experience, the relationships you have, should come to bear in these conversations. That's the expertise we're asking you to tap as you are reviewing grant applications. It's finding that balance of making sure that there isn't sort of undue weight for one thing and you ignore all the rest. So if community organizing is really central and you see that in an application, but there's a lot of other red flags in the application that maybe this isn't a good application to move forward, paying attention to the undue weight and balance, and trying to have that balance sort of within yourself and also as a panel, because you should be bringing your expertise to bear, and that may slightly bias how you show up in the conversation, but really paying attention and making sure that that's balanced in your questioning and challenging yourself, and also that your committee members, your fellow panelists are doing the same and engaging in that conversation. I will definitely look, Katie, for some of those resources and send them your way, and then maybe connect and see if they sort of hit on what Shanice was trying to address.
Okay. So we haven't, we went a little, we're not exactly on the timeline that we had in our heads, which is totally okay. But I did want to, the exercise that we kind of had imagined for this, and James, if you can bring up the Jamboard and share your screen.
Here, just a moment.
That we wanted, kind of what we wanted to do was ask you all just to take some time in this meeting, and if you didn't have an opportunity to do it before, and look at the scoring criteria for the scoring criteria guidance. So those tables that are for the large grants, and there's tables for small grants, and the tables for planning. Look at those and look at the criteria for how you get no points, the middle of the road points, or the full points, and then try and think about ways in which bias might come up as you're scoring each of those criteria. So recognizing that for planning grants, there's only 3 sections. There's organizational information, the project description and scope, and then the budget. So these don't all apply to planning grants, and there's differences between small and large, but there are also a lot of similarities. And so we just wanted to give folks some time to be looking at those tables under each of these categories or each of these sections, the section 1, organizational information, and then project description and scope, environmental benefit, and then there's the next 3 sections are on the second page, and just put down your thoughts about kind of where you see bias might come up, and so that we can kind of name them and think about, and then maybe be thinking about ways to interrupt them. So we're gonna, hopefully everyone, if anybody needs me to stick the link in the, does everybody have the link that I sent out? I do see a lot of these little animal characters that show up on there, so it looks like you're all joining. But if anybody's not, raise your hand and I'll try and get you hooked in there. But yeah, we just like to take, like maybe just 10 minutes, and you feel free to turn your camera off if that feels less awkward, and or leave it on if you want to, and we will just kind of start talking again in about 10 minutes. All right, I'm going to ask everyone to come back to the Zoom room. And you're welcome to keep putting things on the Jamboard there. I just wanted to keep things moving. We have about 15 more minutes until the end of the meeting. And Jill, did you want to facilitate this part of the conversation? Some questions, and then maybe we can share some observations.
Yeah, thanks all for participating in this. This is really amazing to watch. I have never seen a Jamboard before, so part of the fascination was with this process. But I really appreciate seeing all these thoughts shared, and I'm curious, as you all are reflecting on this Jamboard and what you've seen others share, if there's anything that surprised you.
I think for me, it's just the sheer magnitude and scope of all these possible biases that can come in. I mean, I'm reading some of these and it's like, oh yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense. And it's like, wow, this whole process is loaded with biases.
And Robin, sometimes what happens when folks learn that about bias, when we acknowledge the fact that bias is part of how our brains process information, we have these sort of mental maps that we use, folks sort of throw up their hands and say, well, bias is just a thing, I can't do anything about it. And that is why we need to be talking about bias all the time, because paying attention to it, seeing how much it shows up in our world, in our conversations, how much it's going to show up in this grant application process, being able to develop comfort in naming and addressing biases are really the only way that we're going to create a more equitable world and interact with each other in ways that are not rooted in these biases. So yes, this is absolutely, there is a vast number of biases because that's how our brains sort of sort information, and we've grown up with a lot of narratives about people and communities. But we need to engage in this conversation as often as possible. I think I see Maria's hand up.
I really enjoyed seeing everyone's ideas out there. I feel like none of it is a huge surprise because I know we've engaged in a lot of dialogue over the past year in all the meetings to unpack some really big and heavy stuff. Personally, for me, I felt like there was a lot of bias already being unpacked in our conversations around what we deem as valid community wealth building, or how we validate wealth building through grant making, how we validate what community-oriented environmental solutions are, and so forth. So I like that it's out here and want to keep reading through it as we talk here.
Thanks, Maria. Other kind of general reflections on what this process was like, things that came up? So I want to just kind of quickly go through some of the themes that I'm seeing. In this first section, section 1, organizational information, lots of sort of comments about the visibility of a nonprofit. If you are familiar, if there's a reputation you've heard of, if that nonprofit is in the media, assumptions that we sort of hold about nonprofits. Then thinking about who those nonprofits are serving, if they are serving your communities. Any additional thoughts folks want to share on that section? project description. Go ahead.
Oh, I just wanted to share, I guess, a couple of things that came up for me as I was watching you all put the Post-it notes on the Jamboard that I think shows up a lot in grant review. And one is just, and certainly has for me in the past when I have been reviewing grants, is just being really aware of my tolerance for uncertainty and how risky uncertainty feels. And I think that that shows up in a lot of these different sections, and it's something to keep a close eye on, because we have different risk tolerances as humans, but particularly in the project description and scope section. So, you might see an application that feels much more shovel ready. So they've got their team all named, and they know exactly who they are, and everything's kind of lined out. And so there's less unknowns, which feels less risky. And but that's a bias that we don't really want to see showing up in our grant review process. So that's one that I think that aversion to uncertainty that kind of can play across a lot of the things. So I just wanted to, I guess, call that one out.
Are there other themes that folks are seeing?
And we will, like we did last time, kind of make a PDF of this and put them into the minutes of the meeting, so that people can kind of have more time to think about them before we go into the actual scoring panels. I did want to note one more theme that I noticed when I was watching the sticky notes, and that was that I think this idea. That is my dog, who really wants to come into this room that I am inside of right now. So I apologize for that. But this idea that you might be reading along and think to yourself, oh, they don't need the money. And I think that can show up in a couple of different places. In the organizational information, I've been involved in panels before where people make assumptions about how much a nonprofit executive director should be paid. And if they see as part of the application that some staff is being paid what feels like more than their expectation, because we have these assumptions about nonprofits and how much they pay, then that might kind of color the way that you view the rest of the information that's presented in the application. And I think it can show up again in leverage. If you see an application that has a lot of matching funds, that could impact how you feel about whether or not the money is needed. So, Maria?
I wasn't sure where this fits, but I was thinking a lot about the cues that we might get from staff or council members or peers around PCEF grant making, or the distribution of grant funding across sectors, subject matter, topics, solutions, and size of organizations. Where does that fit in? Or where does like the influence of staff or other folks come in to that? Is that considered noise, or the cultural noise that I saw on a slide, or is that something else?
I'm not sure. Jill, do you have thoughts on that?
So I think cultural noise can show up in that sort of influence sphere. Yeah, I think often cultural noise shows up when there's sort of a cross-cultural communication issue, or when someone sort of writes an application along the lines of writes an application in such a way that it will appeal to the grant review committee. So references those relationships or the influence that power holders may have, those sort of cues into those pieces can really, without necessarily actually having that foundation. So when we give the answer, we're expecting someone to want to hear. That's often how cultural noise shows up in these processes. I feel like you asked a more complicated question though about how to address the influence that council, the preference that council might have, opinions that council might have in this process. And I don't know that I'm the right person to speak to that. So.
We may have to wait until Sam gets back from paternity leave to answer that particular, to speak to that particular question. Michael? You're muted, Michael.
Sorry about that. I had a giant screen that took over my whole computer. I was going to say that for me, I think that, and I don't know if this happens for other people, but for me, when things are too nice and too glossy and too well put together, I start to look at them far more critically too. I like, if it's too good, I get very suspicious. So I can be the opposite, right? Like that like it just looks too good. It's had too much effort put in. It's too perfect. It's too well organized, and that I start distrusting it.
I think that's a really valid one.
And I think I saw some other comments in the Jam board that reflect that what specific language are folks using? Are we a little more suspicious of that language, or does it align with our sort of understanding of the project and the application? Yeah.
All right, well, we have folks about 3 minutes. Michael, your hand is up. Is it up again or up still? It's up. Okay. And so maybe, James, if you want to stop sharing your screen for a second. Okay, now I can see all of your lovely faces again. We don't have another committee meeting scheduled yet, because the next thing that's going to happen is the independent scoring, and then the scoring panels, and then reconvening as a full committee to kind of consider the whole portfolio of applications that you got and the scores that they received as one of the considerations in your decision-making process. I think Michael has pointed out a few times that, the scores are one consideration that the full committee has in front of them when they are making in their deliberations about what they're going to recommend for funding to City Council. So I just wanted to offer up that staff are available. Feel free to reach out if between now and then you feel like you need anything, or you're missing a piece of information, or something changes. We are around, so with the exception of Sam, who is not around at the moment. So I'm going to try and give him a little bit of time before we start reaching back out to him. And then just wanted to see if anybody had any closing comments. No, Ranfis, call Sam is not what you heard. Do not call Sam.
Just thanks for the training and the clear examples that you provided today, giving us some room to talk about it a little more and reflect on it.
Yeah, thank you.
All right, thank you.
Sorry, thank you for the training, and glad we're at this stage, and very thankful for the PCEF team. Even though Sam's gone, we know we've got a really great team working on this. So really excited for these next steps. So I'm very excited on that.
Yep, we're excited to get to read them too.
Thanks for having me in this
All right, and
conversation, you
thank
all.
you, Jill.
Yeah, absolutely. It was great to meet all of you.
Thanks, Jill.
Bye, everyone.